My story with Patricia began like one of those tales you never expect to be your own. We met at a wedding, the kind of event where everything seems to promise a bright future. In the early days, it was as if we were living a dream, filled with laughter, shared moments, and plans for the future. It felt like we fit perfectly, as if we were made for each other. However, fate had other plans for us. Discovering the betrayal was like a punch to the gut, a blow that left me stunned and disoriented. How could it be true? How could someone I loved and trusted so much betray me in such a way? The confrontation was painful, a conversation I never wanted to have, but one that became inevitable. Words were said, harsh truths were revealed, and the reality I knew crumbled before me. The decision to move forward with the divorce was one of the hardest of my life. The days that followed were an emotional roller coaster. But there were moments of clarity, moments where I found strength I didn't even know I had. Friends became anchors in a stormy sea, supporting me and reminding me of who I was beyond this relationship that had defined so much of my life. Gradually, I realized that the end of our love story didn't mean the end of my own story. Life continued, and I had the power to shape my own future. So, with determination, courage, and a good dose of support, I walked toward the unknown, ready to face whatever destiny had in store for me.
Hey guys, welcome to our channel.
I'm Jordan, 27M. I met Patricia, 27F, at a wedding where we were seated together. It was a setup by the bride and groom, excited to match us. My first sight of her left me in awe, her beauty was breathtaking. We talked all night, discovering instant connections, and danced until dawn. The kiss we shared on the dance floor marked the beginning of what seemed like a perfect story. Our relationship blossomed without major disagreements until, just before our first wedding anniversary, everything fell apart. Little signs started piling up, she became more secretive with her phone, nights out became frequent, and our intimacy vanished. I tried bringing up my concerns several times, but was ignored. My insecurities grew as she seemed indifferent to my attempts at communication. I began to distance myself, stopped kissing her before leaving for work, and limited our conversations to the bare minimum. I felt like I was trapped in an emotional whirlpool, trying to figure out where things had gone wrong. One night, as my wife slept peacefully beside me, restlessness overtook me. I grabbed her phone and laptop, scrolling through every message, email, and app in search of any sign of betrayal. I didn't find anything initially, but something inside me told me to dig deeper. That's when I decided to check her car, and while searching, I found a second phone hidden away. In that moment, all my suspicions were confirmed. I knew what was happening, but I needed all the evidence before confronting her. I didn't want to hear excuses or downplaying. I spent the entire night connected to the phone, transferring data to my computer, printing incriminating messages and photos. Meanwhile, I frantically searched for divorce lawyers online. The days dragged on as I spent hours in my home office, reading lawyer bios and sending emails to find the best one for my case. It was a torturous process, especially because it was the weekend, and the lawyers were out of the office. My heart was shattered, and I could barely breathe. Finally, I decided to find out who the other man was in her life. I typed the number into my phone, pretending to be a telecom service, just to see the name Paul appear on the screen. It took me a moment to process, but when the pieces fell into place, a wave of rage and indignation flooded me. I erupted in a fit of anger in my office, cursing and screaming like never before. My wife came to check on what was happening, but I ruthlessly sent her away. She quietly retreated to the bedroom, closing the door carefully behind her, leaving me alone with my tumultuous thoughts. I never thought it would come to this. I had never raised my voice at her, let alone cursed her. I left the office in furious silence, unable to face the betrayal I had just uncovered. I called an old friend, Teddy, who had been the groom at the wedding where I met Paul. I needed a shoulder to lean on and asked him to grab a drink with me. Teddy immediately sensed something wrong in my voice and insisted on knowing what was going on. With a lump in my throat, I admitted to him that Patricia was cheating on me, revealing that the other man was Paul, the same guy he had introduced me to. Teddy was visibly upset, feeling somewhat responsible, though it was clear he wasn't at fault. We agreed to keep it a secret for the time being, as I hadn't spoken to Patricia or a lawyer yet. I needed time to process everything and plan my next steps. As we drank together, the weight of what I had discovered hung over us, turning that night into a storm of emotions and tough decisions to come. That night, I called an Uber and went home around 3 a.m. It was the first time I checked my phone since calling Teddy. There was a flood of missed calls and text messages from my wife, all asking where I was, if I was okay, and when I'd be home. When I finally arrived, I found her asleep on the couch. I quietly made my way upstairs to our bedroom and collapsed into bed, exhausted. I woke up with her beside me in bed. I got up, dressed quickly, and left the house without saying a word. I got in my car and drove straight to the office, burying myself in work, trying to keep my mind occupied and away from the emotional storm consuming me. The day flew by, and before I knew it, it was 10 p.m. I went home, expecting to find the house empty since she'd been going out a lot and staying out late. But to my surprise, my wife was there, waiting for me with a smile, as if nothing had happened, ready to greet me like everything was normal. She offered me the dinner she had prepared, but I politely declined, choosing to retreat to the bedroom. She followed shortly after, trying to start a conversation about what was wrong, but I pushed her away with coldness. I told her to leave me alone, that I just wanted to sleep. The next morning, I received an email from the lawyer asking to meet later that day. I confirmed the meeting and prepared for the day. I went downstairs to leave and found Patricia in the kitchen, making breakfast. She asked to talk. I made a plate and sat down, trying to appear calm. She started by saying that I had been acting differently, that I had changed, and she wanted to know why. I made up an excuse about stress at work and said it would all be over soon. I quickly finished breakfast and withdrew to my office, counting down the minutes until my lawyer meeting. As I left, I informed my assistant that I would be out for lunch with a client, knowing that my wife might call to check on me. The meeting with the lawyer went as planned. I handed over all the evidence I had collected, and he confirmed the seriousness of the situation. He sympathized but said the evidence was solid enough to secure my financial interests in the divorce. He suggested keeping the original documents, but I preferred that he make copies since I hadn't yet told my wife that I knew everything. The emotional weight and the need to move forward with my life were overwhelming, and every step toward the divorce felt more decisive and painful. The lawyer agreed and asked the assistant to make copies of the documents. I asked when she would be served with divorce papers, and he said it would take about 2 weeks. I thanked him and left the office, with a lump in my throat and a heavy heart but determined to confront my wife. When I got home, she wasn't there. I called her, but no one answered. I tried again, no answer. I sent a message, "I don't care if you're with Paul right now, come home, we need to talk." It didn't take more than a minute for her to call me, asking what I was talking about. I simply responded, "Come home now." She arrived about 15 minutes later. As she walked in, I said, "Wow, look at that, 15 minutes. That's about the same distance between here and Paul's house, isn't it?" She looked at me, confused, but all she could manage was to ask what I was talking about. I gave her a minute to compose herself, but she just stared at me in silence. "Well, aren't you going to say anything?" I asked. She tried to deny it, to lie, but I let her continue. She started getting defensive and insulting me. I slammed my fist on the table to silence her and pulled out the evidence. "Look at this mountain of proof I've gathered against you," I said, showing her every printed page, every incriminating message. I watched as her eyes filled with tears, and she began to apologize, saying she loved me. But her excuses fell apart in the face of reality. "Sweetheart, what happened to that energy you had just now when you were insulting me?" I asked. She tried to hug me, telling me how sorry she was. I put my hand out and said, "Don't touch me." She suggested we go to the bedroom, but I looked her in the eyes and said, "Honey, I'm never going to touch you again. You want to know who else has these photos and messages? My lawyer. I'm divorcing you. Now, grab a bag, pack your clothes, and leave my house." That was 3 days ago. Since then, I haven't heard a word from her. No attempts at an apology, no plea for forgiveness. The house feels strangely empty without her, but every time I think about giving into the pain and sadness, I remember the images and messages I handed over to my lawyer. Now, I'm planning a bit of damage control in my life. I scheduled a doctor's appointment to check my health, especially for STDs. The appointment is in 2 days. I felt the need to inform the people closest to me about the divorce. My dad and a few friends offered their unconditional support, ready to help with whatever I needed. So, I'm moving on, with the support of friends and taking care of myself. Next, I decided to contact her family. I sent a message to Patricia's parents, expressing my gratitude for welcoming me into their family but informing them that we were getting a divorce. It was strange and suffocating to write the email because they were wonderful people, but I knew my journey with Patricia was over. I didn't get an immediate response from them. Afterward, I reached out to Emma, Patricia's sister, someone I had a good relationship with. It was hard to send that message, knowing I was breaking a friendship I valued. I explained the situation and said I'd be available if she needed anything. Patricia's parents eventually responded. The dialogue was polite but revealing. They had no idea what was happening and expressed their sadness at not being informed sooner. That's when I told them about the affair, which I suspected had started even before our wedding. They were shocked, promising to reach out to her immediately. After dealing with her family, I decided to approach Paul's fiancée. I sent a message asking to meet at a cafe near her work. She agreed to meet, and I mentally prepared myself for yet another difficult conversation. Time seemed to drag as I waited for the meeting, thinking about what was coming next in this painful journey of discovery and tough decisions. I arrived at the cafe first, ordered my bitter coffee, and nervously waited for her. She walked in a few minutes later, ordered her drink, and joined me at the table. I knew there was no easy way to say what needed to be said, so I dove straight into it. Paul had been cheating on her with my wife for over a year. I saw the shock on her face as I explained that I had only discovered it a few days ago. I know I should have told you sooner, but I had my own divorce to deal with. She wanted to know how I found out, so I told her the whole story, mentioning the messages and photos I had compiled. I offered her the binder with the evidence, and as she flipped through it in silence, tears began to roll down her cheeks. I offered to make additional copies for her, in case she wanted to confront Paul or simply needed to process the betrayal. She thanked me, stood up with the binder in hand, and I told her I'd be there if she needed anything else. She nodded and left, looking defeated by the revelation she had just received. My friends advised me to stay sober and keep my head up, but the truth is my world had crumbled. This week, I decided to retreat to my back porch, where I've been drinking, smoking cigars, and listening to loud music to keep the dark thoughts at bay. I need this time to process everything. After this week, I'll stop feeling sorry for myself and get back to my usual routine. Once I recovered, I packed most of her things, from clothes to jewelry. I put our wedding album and all the photos in boxes, ready for when she comes to pick them up. I don't want her presence here any longer than necessary. For now, there's no more drama happening. I've notified everyone I needed to, seen my doctor, and my lawyer is handling the process to free me from all this. I hope the divorce will be as smooth as possible. One morning, when I woke up, I was surprised by the tempting aroma of breakfast in the air. My first thought was anger, assuming Patricia had returned and was trying to make peace with a simple morning meal. Ready to start a fight, I stormed into the kitchen, but to my great surprise, it was Emma, Patricia's sister, standing there. She ran to me and hugged me without saying a word. She guided me to the table and served a plate, and as I ate, she started to open up. Emma told me how she had asked Patricia about our issues when I didn't respond, and later, she found out about the divorce through a message from me. Apparently, Patricia had downplayed everything, saying it was just a passing problem. We talked for hours. Emma shared how she confronted Patricia, who finally admitted the truth. Patricia claimed it was a one-time mistake and tried to downplay the situation. But Emma didn't abandon me. She was there for me, supporting me unconditionally despite everything. I told Emma that there was no chance of reconciliation. If she came here thinking she could change my mind, she was wasting her time. She laughed and reassured me that she wasn't here for my wife but for me. It was a relief to know that my relationship with Emma would remain strong, even amidst the chaos of a divorce. Emma stayed with me for 2 days, occupying the guest room. She left this morning as I prepared to escape to my hunting and fishing cabin, a refuge I've known since before I married Patricia. I offered Emma the chance to join me, but I knew it was important for her to take care of her own family and sister during this delicate time. We said goodbye with a warm hug, and she left, leaving me with a renewed feeling that, despite everything, there was still support and unconditional love around me. I'm truly grateful to Emma for being by my side during this tumultuous time. Before anyone starts to speculate, no, there's no romance between us. Our connection is purely a sincere friendship, something I deeply value. I've stayed in touch with Paul's fiancée a few times. She's going through a tough time and seems lost about what to do. I offered her my shoulder and ear to vent, and I'm readily available for any meeting next week if she needs it. My stay at the cabin was peaceful. Recently, I received confirmation from the doctor that I'm clean. As for Paul's fiancée, after some time of silence, I finally received a response. She's currently with her family and didn't go into much detail about her situation. I can only assume things aren't going well for her, but at least she's surrounded by the loving support of her family. She invited me for coffee tomorrow, and of course, I accepted. The next day, we met at the same hipster cafe. The rustic environment strangely matched the seriousness of our conversation. Sitting with our cups of coffee, we dove into a dialogue that embraced all the mess Patricia and Paul had left behind. I told her that once someone cheats, for me, it's the end. The amount of selfishness and disrespect required to cheat, especially for a year, was something I couldn't forgive. Clearly, Patricia didn't care about me. I asked her what her plan was. She told me she was confused, that everything she thought was true had turned into a lie. She didn't know what her next step would be, whether to move on or forgive him and reconcile. I told her that if she could forgive someone for cheating on her for so long, she was a better person than me. She said her whole family was telling her she should forgive and reconcile. I told her that just because it's what the family wants doesn't mean she has to agree and follow the same path. Paul clearly doesn't care about marriage and what it means. He cheated on his fiancée with my wife. If that doesn't show he's unfit for marriage, I don't know what does. I told her she needed to do what she felt was right and not let anyone but herself make decisions that would affect her life. When I found out about the cheating, all I could do was think of a way for my heart to trick my brain into finding some way to accept and forgive her, but I just couldn't do it. I bet when you went to stay with your family, you had a pretty good idea of what you were going to do but let too many people in, and they all gave their opinion on it. I ended by telling her that all she needed to do was follow her intuition. Her brain and heart will always lie to her, but if her intuition feels something's wrong, 9 times out of 10, her intuition is probably right. Soon after, she thanked me, and we said our goodbyes. The next day, I got a message from my lawyer saying Patricia had been officially served with the divorce papers. Not long after, Emma called and told me Patricia hadn't left the room all day and was sobbing in bed. I told Emma she'd been served and was probably realizing how serious her mistake was. We talked for a while longer and then hung up. After that, I prepared myself for my wife's explosion. I imagined if there was ever a moment for it to happen, it would be soon, now that she'd been served. So now I'm waiting patiently, bracing for the moment. I have painkillers on hand for what I can only assume will be a terrible headache. I expected Patricia to show up furious. I had no real reason to believe she would do anything different, given everything that had happened. I checked to make sure all the cameras I had were working properly, both inside and outside the house. I notified my friend that Patricia had been served today and if she showed up, he needed to get to my house as quickly as possible. It turns out I was right, because Patricia showed up at the house, banging on the door and yelling for me to let her in. I immediately called my friend and Emma, asking them to come over because Patricia was pounding on the door. She was cursing at me, begging to be let in, calling me every name in the book, and asking how I could be so heartless. She wasn't wrong because the whole time she was screaming and banging on the door, all I could do was laugh. When my friend showed up, she was still yelling and cursing. He started recording on his phone. A wise precaution, given the explosive situation. But to make matters worse, my friend brought his wife, who was friends with Patricia. So, she got out of the car and tried to calm her down. She walked up to Patricia, putting her arms around her. It was a fatal mistake because Patricia wasn't in the mood to be calmed down. She turned to her friend, slapping her across the face, yelling at her to mind her own business.
There are invisible scars that shape lives. Abuse steals your peace, but not your strength. Breaking the Cycle of Abuse is an interactive guide where you'll find powerful tools to identify the signs of abuse, understand the dynamics of violence, find shelter and legal and psychological support, plan a safe exit from a harmful environment, overcome trauma and rebuild your self-esteem. Start your journey of healing and transformation now for just $9.60.
My friend, now armed with video evidence, didn't hesitate. He called the police while Patricia continued her verbal and emotional assault. When the police arrived, Patricia quickly changed her tactics. She started crying, claiming that I had assaulted her and thrown her out of the house. 2 officers approached her, trying to understand the situation. Meanwhile, one of the officers came over to me. "You need to come with me," he said, starting to handcuff me. My friend explained the truth to the officers, how Patricia had shown up agitated and aggressive from the start. I insisted that I could prove she was lying. I told him about the cameras I had installed, both inside and outside the house, recording every second of that chaotic situation. Finally, the evidence was reviewed. The police watched the videos from both my cameras and my friend's phone. It became clear who was causing the disturbance. Patricia was confronted with the truth, and her attempt to flip the situation didn't succeed. Relief mixed with indignation swept over me as the officer acknowledged his mistake and apologized. It seemed Patricia had gotten herself into serious trouble. The officer informed me they had received 15 calls from my neighbors complaining about Patricia's antics. After dealing with the police for about half an hour, Patricia ended up handcuffed and charged with disturbing the peace and assault. Here I was, in the middle of an emotional storm that seemed never-ending. As Patricia was taken away, a feeling of both relief and exhaustion washed over me. This was just another battle in a war that seemed far from over. Then Emma showed up to offer her support. We decided that Emma would stay the night with me, since Patricia was in custody. We talked late into the night, sharing concerns and discussing future decisions. While the outside world seemed chaotic, inside my home we found a momentary refuge. At dawn, Emma had already taken steps to contact her parents and start figuring out Patricia's situation. She was incredibly supportive. While she handled those arrangements, I was planning another escape to my cabin, a quiet oasis far from the city's chaos. The following days were a welcome breather. The weekend at the cabin was peaceful and restorative. My lawyer was contacted by Patricia, informing him that she agreed to the divorce. Finally, we could start the process. I also checked in with Paul's fiancée to see if she had any updates. She told me she kicked him out of the house, and her dad and brother packed up all his belongings. They wanted to beat him up, but she asked them not to, as she just wanted to leave everything behind and move on. She thanked me for checking in and said her close friends were there to support her. On Friday, after work, I rushed home, planning to head back to my cabin for the weekend. When I arrived, Emma was in my driveway, ready to pick up her sister's things. She had a list of what Patricia wanted me to check. Nearly everything was already boxed up or waiting to be collected. I offered to pay for a moving company to take everything. I was headed to my cabin and didn't have the time to deal with these matters. Emma thought that was a great idea and wished me well on my trip. She grabbed a box of Patricia's clothes and put it in her car. Then, she turned to me and asked if she could join me. I said, sure, why not? She went home, dropped off the box, and packed a bag. We left for the cabin, and the weekend went great. On Monday, I called a moving company, and less than 24 hours later, 3 big guys with a giant truck were at my door. I had all the boxes open and labeled. As they loaded the boxes, I was documenting everything, taking photos and videos, until the last box was sealed. I then sent all the footage and pictures to my lawyer and carried on with my day, thinking I was finally free of this issue. But life, as always, had its own plans. A few days after the movers delivered Patricia's things, my lawyer received paperwork stating I had damaged her belongings and demanding $1,500, or she would take me to court. My lawyer sent over all the videos and pictures, asking exactly where the alleged damage was. This might be a headache now, but when the time comes, all of this will be perfect evidence. I don't think her lawyer was prepared for how meticulous I am and that I would document and photograph everything. As the divorce process dragged on, Patricia called me once a day, every day, but I never answered. If she left a voicemail, I didn't even bother listening. I just sent it to my lawyer. Every time I sent something to him, he would always say, "You listen to everything I say and gathered a mountain of evidence on your own." I've never had a client who's done so well. I trusted my lawyer to be my shield and sword in this battle I never imagined I'd have to fight. And so, as time passed and the days dragged on, I knew that eventually, the evidence would speak for itself. Each message from my lawyer brought a smile to my face. Every word was a comforting reminder that I was on the right track. Through it all, I felt the weight lifting from my shoulders. About 2, maybe 3 weeks ago, my lawyer assured me we had enough evidence to face Patricia in court. We set a date to meet at a neutral law office last week. We arrived early that tense morning, and to my surprise, Patricia was already there with her lawyer. We exchanged formal greetings as the lawyers prepared to begin. We sat side by side, waiting in a silence filled with expectations. Her lawyer started the conversation by asking what we were willing to offer. With a mountain of evidence of Patricia's infidelity and inappropriate behavior, the only thing we were offering was half the sale price of the house and half the savings account. That's more than any judge would grant. Basically, what you brought into the marriage is what you're leaving with. Then my lawyer gave Patricia a piercing look and said, "If you decide to go to court, I will make you read every message out loud. I will show every photo for everyone in the courtroom to see. And I will make you describe in detail what you're doing in each photo. Then, I'll bring up your recent posts and play the video from the night you were arrested." Patricia started crying, looking at me and asking if there was anything she could do to fix this. I said, "You've been cheating on me since before our marriage. There's nothing you can do to make me forget or forgive you for what you did. Signing the papers is more than you deserve, and I want to be done with this farce you created." She cried even more, apologized, and went to the bathroom. When she returned, still in tears, she signed the papers and left shortly after. In about a month, everything will be filed, and all that will be left is to sell the house, a final step to closing this painful chapter of my life.
Want more mysteries, twists, and exciting moments? So you can't miss this video. Click now and continue this journey of fascinating stories. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the bell so you don't miss any news. Leave your comments and see you next time.